So today we're doing the conservation of mass lab, and again that's on pages 27 and 28 in the lab packet. We're going to be doing some reactions. We're going to also be taking the mass. So what I did was I took the time to measure everything out beforehand. And the first reaction I'm going to show you, and you can see it on the paper there, is the calcium chloride plus the sodium carbonate yields salt and CaCO3. Now you'll need to balance the equation. You can do that later. Also, another thing to keep in mind, and that's very important, is at any time throughout this video, pause it. If you need a minute to get some observations or to write anything down, just pause the video, not a problem. So what I have here is I have a tube of calcium chloride and a tube of sodium carbonate. And you can see it says put about 1 centimeter, so I've filled up the bottom. So take a second and you should be able to get your observations. So before I mix the two of them, they're clear and they're colorless. And it's important to note that those are different things because, for example, I could have a blue solution that's clear, but it's not colorless. Or like if you have cherry 7-Up, that's clear, but it's not colorless. So let's put it on the balance here. And notice, I put both of the test tubes and I put them in a beaker. And if I step out of the way, so I'm not putting a shadow on the balance here, we'll write down that 69.6 grams. That's the total mass before. Now I'm going to take them, I'm going to mix them. I think you can see that something happened. It's no longer clear, and it almost looks kind of milky, like there's a solid in there, like milk isn't clear, for example. Now I'm going to put it back in. I'm going to get the mass after. I did need to put the empty test tube back in there, because otherwise, obviously, I'd have less mass. And let's see what our reading is. And I'll write it down, 69.5 grams. So let me take these and put them off to the side here. I'll show you the paper just so you can see it. So it was 69.6 before, 69.5 grams afterwards. Slight difference. Now I'm going to do the exact same thing, but with a different compound. This is part 2, different compounds. I'm going to use calcium chloride again, and this time we're going to use sodium hydroxide. Sodium hydroxide especially is very dangerous if you get it in your eye. So although you can't see me, I do want to stress I am wearing my safety glasses, my safety goggles here as I'm filming the whole thing. Even though I'm all by myself, I still want to protect my eyes. So take your observations here. Do you see any color? Do they seem to be fairly clear or not? So now I've got to put them in, and it looks like 65.5 grams before. Let's mix them. Put the empty one back in, and see if you see any difference here in this test tube. It's a little hard to see, but it definitely looks a little less clear than it did before. So let me put that in and see what I get. Now I'll show you here 65.5 grams before and 65.4 grams afterwards. Slight difference. The reaction is right down here. You'll need to balance it, but you'll do that on your own time. Everybody here should be really good at balancing. Now let's look at a couple more here. So this time we're going to have also NaOH and copper sulfate. And the copper sulfate is the blue one. Looks pretty clear too, doesn't it? Even though it's blue, it looks like we can see through it. So this is all part 3. Let's put it in there and get a reading. Hopefully you can see that's 65.1 grams. Just like before, we'll mix them. We have to put the empty one back in. It's mostly empty. I didn't get every single thing out. Let me just gently swirl it. And I think you can see it looks a little bit different. You can get your observations. You can decide whether it's maybe a little bit cloudy. Maybe there's a solid in there. I don't know. And I'm going to put that in. So this is afterwards and write the mass down. And I'll show you these numbers. 65.1 before, 65.1 after. Balancing it is up to you. You can do that later. Now the last part's a little bit trickier, We have to use a bigger beaker. And I want to re-zero my balance, just make sure everything's okay. So I've got a beaker here. It's a little bit bigger. And what I'm going to put in there, this is sodium hydrogen carbonate, or sodium bicarbonate. This is baking soda, the exact same stuff you can buy at any supermarket or the dollar store. Not a problem. So I just put a scoop of that in there. Don't worry about the mass just yet. What we're going to do is react it with HCl, which I think you can see looks like water. Now the tricky part is getting the mass. I need to get the mass of the whole thing, the HCl and the sodium bicarbonate. Wow, I'm getting 160.0 grams. Hopefully you can see that on the balance down here. If not, I wrote it down for us. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to mix this with the baking soda. And I don't really want to do it on the balance. Really, we'll slide that out of the way. I would much rather do it right here on the desktop. So I'm going to dump this in. In fact, I'm even going to put the, eventually I'm going to put the medicine cup in there. So did you see it fizz and you could hear it really quickly? In fact, I can make sure and try and react anything that's left. Swish it around really well. And like I said, I have my safety goggles on because I don't want to splash any of this in my eye. HCl is very bad for your eyes too. All right, so you can get the picture, and definitely we saw some reactions. Looks like there's some unreacted baking soda still in there. Let's bring our balance back. I have to put both things on the balance. We started out at 160, but now we're down to 159.2 grams. So we started out at 160, and now we're down to 159.2. You'll balance the reaction on your own. Also, and I mentioned this later in the video, there is a formula to help you do your percent difference. So what you would do is, let's just make up a number. I don't want to use the numbers that are here. Let's say something was 4 grams before and was 3.98 afterwards. I'll show you here in a second. We use absolute value times 100. We would take the before value, the 4.00, minus 3.98. Make sure to do that and then hit equals on your calculator. Then divide by 4, hit equals again, times 100. Now let's talk about what you're going to turn in. So what you'll do now is the Conservation of Mass lab report sheet. And they're on pages 29 and 30 in the lab packet. So you'll have to complete the data tables with your observations before, observations after, total mass before and after, and the percent difference. Now there's an example a formula for how to do the percent difference. Here it's at the very bottom of page 28, where you use mass before minus mass after divided by mass before times 100. Now, in terms of the questions, answer them in complete sentences. You must include at least some sample numbers. You don't have to include your entire data for all 4 parts, but you have to include some numbers to back up your statements. If you don't have numbers, you're not really doing science. So again, complete sentences, numbers, your work must be your own. You shouldn't be copying from somebody else because that would be an academic problem. So, do it honestly and do your best job with it. And then you'll turn that into me, and thanks very much.